brands that can distinguish themselves visually and creatively are going to do much better.
I find that that's like a really deadly combination.
In my experience, agencies are either design agencies and they're good at creative, or they're media agencies and they're good at buying, but doing both.
Lily, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
I am super excited to have you here. I have the pleasure of working with Lily every day. We just got back from an awesome offsite here in Austin. So we got to hang out for a couple of days and talk about business and cold plunge for the first time. Is that your first cold? Is that the first cold plunge?
That was my first cold plunge. I cannot say that I enjoyed it.
We had one of the first days somebody come in and do some breath work for the team. After that, we hopped in this. We were staying at this house and it had this big pool that was not necessarily a cold plunge, but it was so cold out that it was freezing 35 degrees, and hopped in and kicked off our offsite. Everyone hopped in, and it was good, and I was impressed that everybody jumped in and did it.
Yep, got through. I think less than a minute, but did it.
So I'm super excited to have you on the show because I've gotten to know you over the last, I guess now 7 months since we started working together. And you have so much stored knowledge about e-commerce, running a business, everything that you learned from your time at Free Fly Apparel, which was before coming over here and working with us. So the goal of this interview basically is I want to ask you some questions and kind of unlock some of that knowledge you've got and learn a little bit about how you started off there and what that journey was like and what you learned. So let's kick it off with kind of an open question, but when did you first get started at Free Fly? And when you got started, what was your role when you kicked things off over there?
Yeah. So for a little context, I had moved from Massachusetts, where I grew up, down to Charleston, and I moved without a job and had given myself 6 months to find something, was working in a restaurant. And I was about 3 months in at that point and had applied to a bunch of jobs and was just feeling really frustrated, and saw this post on LinkedIn. It was a really short job post looking for marketing and customer service support. And I had a lot of customer service support and mixed marketing support. I had been working in a nonprofit up in Boston prior to moving, and applied thinking like it was just a total stretch and very different than a lot of the other positions, which I had been mostly still looking for nonprofit jobs at that point, and got the interview and went in and got to meet the team, the 3 founders, who are all family, and just really enjoyed their energy and ended up taking that position. So my first role there was a split job between marketing and customer service. So we were in a building at that point that was both warehouse and office. It was the 3 founders, 1 other full-time employee, and then some part-time employees who did the fulfillment in the back of that building. And I had my own little office and was answering calls, and then also just trying to figure out a marketing strategy, largely like building out emails. There was no real email system when I got there, and then also starting to test and figure out Facebook at that point. And that was in 2016.
It's such an incredible opportunity when you hop into like a real startup right at the ground floor, like trying to figure out how to make things work, especially coming into like a new industry, because you end up having to take on a ton of different work and learn things on the go. So you said, so when you started there, it was you, another employee, the founders. Were you the only person in quote unquote marketing, or how did that look?
So the other full-time employee was managing the warehouse team. So he was doing like all the production and fulfillment. And then before I started, my boss there who was one of the founders, was running customer service from her cell phone. And she was doing all the marketing herself as well as product design at that point. So I was coming in to take that stuff off of her plate. And we worked really closely together throughout my whole time there. She was still very, very involved in the marketing and e-commerce side. But yeah, there was no plan. Like they would come up with an email and then send it the next day. They had a contract designer who would design the emails. And yeah, we would like be like, okay, we need to sell these long sleeve shirts. So let's send an email tomorrow for long sleeves.
Okay, so this is always interesting, right at the beginning. Like, how did you guys get your first traction? Like, how were you selling any product back then? Was it, yeah, what did that look like?
So there was a wholesale side of the business as well, and that continued the whole time I was there. So largely, there was a lot of just word of mouth and growth in the Charleston area through the angler community. So Free Fly is largely based in the fishing community. So that was kind of like the grassroots start of it. And then, really, right as I started, there was a Facebook ad that they had thrown up sort of as a last ditch effort on Facebook. They'd had a lot of failures up until then. And then this one ad really started kicking off. And so that is where like they had the funds to actually hire and start building out some real marketing and growing the e-commerce side of the business. So a lot of the early funding came from the wholesale side.
So what year was this? How many years ago did you kick off working with them?
So I started in 2016, and they had been doing their thing for about 3 years prior to me starting.
So 2016 Facebook environment was quite different back then than it is today. Like
Yes.
what back then, like what was, I don't know, like what do you think was the thing that made it successful? Why did they hit on that first ad? Is there anything specific you remember?
And I think a lot of what makes Free Fly so appealing is it's super aspirational. So a lot of our imagery was fly fishing. So not just hook and bullet fishing, but actually like people on skiffs in Charleston with the fly lines. So even if you don't fish, just seeing that in your feed, like just feels really nice.
It's very aspirational. As somebody who loves fishing, I see it and I'm like, I just would love to be out there.
And I think even if you don't love fishing, like it's green, it's water, it looks really nice. And there is just that kind of romantic side of fly fishing. So I think largely, just, the owners had a really clear vision of wanting to be really authentic to that fly fishing imagery. And honestly, like they used all their friends in the photo shoot. So it was all real people who actually were fly fishing and not models. And I think that just because of the Facebook atmosphere at that point, it just felt really native. It felt really aspirational, and people just ate it up and got really excited about it. And that allowed it to kind of expand out of just that angler community too.
So when you came in and started taking over marketing, did you take over the Facebook ads, the management? What was your role in that?
Yeah. So to start, so to be honest, like I said, I had very little marketing experience. When you work for nonprofits, you market by default, but I had no formal training. I didn't know really anything about digital marketing, but I had sent some emails and sort of had a creative brain. So largely what I was doing in the beginning was email. And then we had an agency that was running Facebook for us. And I think probably within my first year, I might have like just hit my first year mark. We ended up letting that agency go for a variety of reasons. And I remember I was sitting in a meeting. This is a funny story to show you how little I knew about digital marketing. I was sitting in a meeting as we were kind of taking over for this agency. I think it was the last meeting, just listening. And they're talking about like the pixel and how this was going to go. And I was like, what is a pixel? Are they talking about like the pixels of an image? Like what? I didn't even understand what that was. So yeah, fast forward, I learned a lot, trial by fire, because once we let that agency go, I took a course, and then I was running our Facebook ads with support from my manager there. And the two of us did that for, I think, about 2 or 3 years, and saw a lot of growth and success. So that would have been like 2017 to 2018 or so.
What course did you take?
Ezra's through the Smart Marketer, which is a really good, I think he still has that one in there, but it was really hands-on. I had done a lot of the blueprint stuff through Facebook, but it just didn't give you exactly what you needed to know. And his course really took you step by step and was hands-on at the time, even down to like how to set up your campaigns and like teaching me what an ad set was, because I didn't have any of that knowledge going into it.
Yeah, I think it's cool to hear like stories about how people get going with Facebook ads and going from like literally nothing to being really, really competent in running very large ad spend, because almost every story is the same. It's like, I didn't know anything, and then I had to learn and had to go hands-on and pick it up. And I took a course here, I read a blog, I listened to a podcast, and then I tried some stuff. and it started to work. So you said you were running that for about 3 years and being kind of hands-on. How did that evolve for you? I mean, running Facebook ads is very interesting because it involves like creative, it involves media buying. Anything that you learned from running those ads and scaling them up over those 3 years that you can share?
I think the number one thing that I learned is that Facebook is smarter than I am, especially in that time. I think when the algorithm was just really working well. I know it's not quite the same now, unfortunately, but I would always think that I had figured out just the right audience and that I had figured out the right image, and then I would test it against something else, and like the thing that I was like, oh, there's no way that's going to work, would end up performing better. So that was one thing that I ran everything through, is always test. Like, don't ever assume that I know what's going to work best, because I may not. And then I think the other was just like being really authentic and true. And that was just something that like the free fly culture just brought out in all of us that worked there, is just really not trying to make it an ad, not trying to sell a shirt, but instead just expose people to this lifestyle. We all lived in Charleston, and it's a really beautiful spot. And we just wanted to kind of share that excitement. And I think that helped us be really successful on Facebook and in other areas as well. Just being real.
Yeah, I mean, it's really good advice, right? And it's when you think about when I think about businesses that do really well on Facebook, it's like this interesting balance between not focusing on results and focusing on results, or like, right? Like, it's one of those things where I feel like there's all these like marketing, advertising people that like, you got to focus on brand and like all this stuff. And I believe that that's true. And there's also then the performance side. How did you think about that? Or I don't know. I mean, how did you measure whether or not you were successful?
Yeah. I mean, there was definitely metrics that I was being asked to hit and that I had to report back on a weekly and monthly basis. But I think also, like, not having this marketing background, not having a marketing degree, I was coming into it and I just needed it to be really simple in order for myself to understand. And I think that helped all of us understand by just picking, 2 or 3 metrics that were going to be the most important for us. And then those were our live or die metrics. And Facebook can, you can get really lost. There's a ton of information. There's a ton of data that you can see in there. But we, at the time, were really just living by our ROAS and making sure that that was where we wanted it to be. And at the time, that was enough to get after, because we had the data that we needed through Facebook. But I think just keeping it simple, not overdoing it, not having a spreadsheet with 100 different things to track allowed us to kind of push and pull. And it was enough to see like pretty quickly if an ad was working or not,
Sure.
because we always had that flat metric that we were comparing it to.
As things started to grow, right, and you guys started to have more success on Facebook, how did the business change around you? I mean, I know you guys had gone through a lot of growth. Were you hiring pretty consistently throughout that time? Did the office change, and how did it? What did it look like growth wise for the number of people working there?
Yeah, I think they did a really great job of keeping the culture first, and we played the game of like, what do you outsource and what do you bring in? Design was our big thing, so that was a big department that we really put a lot of effort into, as well as the e-commerce side, and then obviously the product team as well, as being a huge part of what we were selling. But outside of that, we really kept a nice balance of having people in and having outsourced different things. And so we did actually end up working with a Facebook agency again. So we grew, but it never had that feeling of like, oh my gosh, things are just like exploding. And even though they were, and it was exciting, it was still kind of our core team running everything. And that, I think, also helped us grow, because we all really cared. We were all really passionate. We all knew the product really, really well. And that just like fed through even down to like our customer service department being a huge part of our team.
And that was that in-house as well, the customer service? Because you were doing it and then
Yes.
you outsourced it, right? Which I want to dive into, because how you did that would be interesting.
Yeah. So I was doing both for a long time, and then I ended up moving fully over into e-commerce and becoming the e-commerce manager. But I hired customer service people underneath me. So the whole time I was there, I was in both departments as a manager, and I just ended up having people underneath me, both on the e-commerce side and the customer service side, which I actually really loved, because I think having that hand in customer service, like I would be in Gorgeous looking at tickets, and if something got elevated, I would get on the phone sometimes, and that it's just instrumental in being able to market and know who you're talking to.
Yeah.
So we kept those two departments pretty closely tied together. So we had customer service in-house while I was there.
So this is an interesting question, because I know there are people that are running their business right now who are still kind of stuck a little bit in the customer service weeds. What allowed you to get out of the weeds and go from being in it to hiring a team underneath you? Anything that what did you guys use for software? Anything that was helpful? And then also anything you learned about hiring people in the customer service role?
Yeah. So to answer the first part of the question, I think the best thing that you can do from a customer service side is just have a system and have really clear policies. Because it's really easy to say, like, figure it out, make the customer happy and that kind of stuff. But as you grow, that's just impossible to scale, and it ends up taking more time to answer a ticket because you're not exactly sure how you're supposed to handle it. So that was a big body of work that I did before handing that off, was like writing out a lot of SOPs, which that comes from the nonprofit side of me, but having just really clear, like, if this happens, do this. If this happens, do this. And then our stack, we started with Help Scout, which I really loved. That's like a really great platform for small teams. And then we used AirCall for our phone. AirCall? I think AirCall. They all have such similar names. And
They're
then
all
that
basically
integrated.
something,
I know.
something plus call.
Right.
Zen
So
call, air call, whatever.
I think it was AirCall.
Yeah.
It integrated right into Help Scout, and it was just everything was in one spot. And then we had a ton of saved replies within Help Scout to allow them, like our team, to just move through things really quickly, because it was apparel. Just a lot of the questions were about returns or fit and stuff like that we could write out in a way that still felt, in our language. It didn't feel like a robot was replying it. And then what I always encouraged our team to do was try to personalize it a little bit so that we'd still had that touch. Again, like not feeling like it's a robot or someone that's like completely disconnected from the product. But yeah, just having systems in place was hugely helpful. And then in terms of hiring and growing that team, honestly, just we did all of our hiring through LinkedIn and posting jobs there. But then in terms of interviewing and finding people, the best people were people who were living that lifestyle. So people who had like been in Charleston, they maybe they're not fishing, but they're living that outdoor lifestyle. Like it's ingrained in them, and that just made it way easier for them to talk to our customers. We actually had, I hope that Megan listens to this, but one of our customer service reps had this lovely older gentleman who would only order over the phone, and he would call and ask to talk to Megan, and they would have nice conversations. And she got married while she was working there. He sent her a wedding gift. So I always told the team that the goal was to get invited to one of our customers' weddings. That was their goal.
I mean, that's awesome. It's also like a really good story to be able to tell. Like there's, every business has like business stories about something that happened. That's a really great one to be able to share. I think it's interesting because the customer service side of things, when you're talking about personalization and adding a little bit to make sure that it feels like genuine and unique, I think there's nothing that pisses people off more than asking a customer service question and then getting a canned response that's wrong or isn't relevant, right? It can take somebody from being like 6 out of 10 frustrated with something to like 10 out of 10 because they're like, this person's wasting my time on top of some issue. I like that kind of idea of, read it and then personalize it and send it to make sure that they know that you care. I want to go back to something you said earlier, which was, I thought, really sharp and something I've picked up as kind of a theme in multiple businesses, was the idea of getting really clear about what you're going to do in-house versus what you're going to outsource. And you said design was one of the things that you invested in heavily because, well, that's what you guys are. At the end of the day, like you're a marketing company that sells. At least my viewpoint of a lot of apparel companies these days is they're marketing companies that happen to sell clothes.
Yeah, The lifestyle component of that type of business is huge. Yeah.
For people who are hesitant to bring design in or to really invest in that, how much of an impact do you think that that had on your success on paid advertising?
A lot. I mean, there's two components of it. There's the designers and the graphics people, and then the photographers. Creative personalities are always fun and interesting. And so it's important to like have the right fit with that person as well. And
Yeah.
if you are doing a lot of contract work with creative personalities, I think that can be challenging sometimes, because if someone is like a freelancer or someone that's just used to doing their own thing, they are probably going to have their own idea of how that project wants to get done. And sometimes that may be fine and take you to levels that you didn't think of. And if you're not a super creative person, like that might be a better direction. But I know like the founders and the product team were all very creative. They had a very specific vision of how things should appear and how they should be sold. And that, like, again, like just leaning into that lifestyle aspect of it, we were able to just have a lot more control by owning that space a little bit more. So I would say huge impact on that. And then it also, like, it just allows you to do more and have more churn when you're doing it in-house. Because if you're working with a contractor and you only have so many hours a month, and you do 10 creatives for Facebook and none of them work, then you're like scrambling to try to figure something out. Whereas when you have it in-house and your desk is right next to them, you can maybe bring them a cup of coffee and ask for a favor for them to turn something around really quickly if you need something because things aren't clicking.
I think it's the there's an aspect that's undervalued, and that is kind of the feel of a brand. And it's one of those things that I've noticed from working with a couple of different founders, that they have like the ones that have a really intuitive sense of what feels good and what is high quality are the ones that are able to, if they have people that can operationalize around them and push things out. I find that though that's like a really deadly combination. I remember when I was working with the Pure Vita guys really early on, I noticed about Griffin, who was one of the founders, was like he was just so in tuned to how things looked and how things felt on the website that there would be things that it would be like, okay, no, this pixel needs to go 3 pixels over, or this whole thing is off, right? Down to a really intense level of detail. But what I think happened with that, from my take, was like it was so dialed in and the feeling was so good that when the paid advertising started amplifying it, it really was successful. And it's like not something that you might have two equivalent businesses and one of them just feels nicer. And so people go with it.
Yeah. I think with what's happening on Facebook right now and just in general, brands that can distinguish themselves visually and creatively are going to do much better. I think that
Yeah.
the platform is going to become about creative and like using, I know Canva's done amazing things for a lot of people, but I think just using those templates isn't going to be enough because it's all going to start to look the same. I think that's, and if Freefly had a lot of copycats too, because once we started to see a lot of success, other people see that. So you're kind of always going to have to stay ahead of it. And I think that's just going to become more and more important, just being really strong and consistent, and also just continuing to what's the next iteration of that creative visual for you.
What did you learn from transitioning back to having an agency run the ads? What made that relationship successful the second time you guys went down there? What did you learn from that?
I think there's just a lot of factors. I think we had gotten to the point where I couldn't manage, like managing Facebook was going to be a full-time job. And so I couldn't do that and also manage people and be on the customer service side as well. So that was just a big reason why we went back into the agency space. We just had a really good working relationship. I think because we knew how the platform worked, like it was easy for us to be able to give advice or to explain how we wanted things to work. I think that can be incredibly frustrating for a lot of people when you're working with an agency and you're trying to get somewhere and it's like they're not. It's almost like, are they telling me the truth or what's this? And the agency that we worked with they definitely were not scamming us. We trusted them, but it was
Yeah.
nice to have that understanding, having run it, and also like really knowing what worked for us. And we still did the creative in-house. So they were really just media buying and running the ads for us.
Would you recommend that to others? Was that a key for you, or do you think it would be possible to do it any other way?
I think it really depends on your business model. I do think like just having control of that creative is really important. If you were going to hand that all off to an agency, I would really make sure that you feel comfortable with the designs that they're doing and that it feels in line with your brand. In my experience, agencies are either design agencies and they're good at creative, or they're like media agencies and they're good at buying, but doing both is hard. So I would be hesitant to put both in the same basket, but it really depends, I think, on what you're trying to sell. But if it is a lifestyle brand and it is something where you're leaning heavily on your creative, I would be uncomfortable handing that off to somebody else, because they're just not going to know the product as good as you.
Yeah. I mean, I agree with that. I think it's so I've very, very rarely seen success stories of people being like, I signed up for this agency that manages our creative and our ad spend, and it's
Yeah.
great.
Yeah, I mean, agencies, it's a hard spot, because like you said, like it's easy to outsource because then you don't
Yeah.
have to do it, but it is handing over a lot of trust to something that, it could make or break your business depending on what exactly it is you're handing
Yeah.
off. So
If you have something that people cannot copy, right? Because it's such like a crazy invention that you created that people understand, and you're just trying to like get it out there, that sometimes might be able to work. Like if you're just like an engineering company and you've got some incredible thing that you've designed that nobody else has, then maybe you can go with an agency and they'll just do all the marketing for you. But most businesses, especially in apparel, it's like, no. Your only competitive advantage is the fact that you can tell us better lifestyle story than somebody else. That's it.
and that's the challenge of selling online, because people can't try it on, they can't feel it. Like, it is hard to sell apparel online. So yeah, you really are leaning on, like, you could have a picture that shows all the angles and stuff, but really what people want to see is see it on body, see it out in the world, and imagine themselves there. Yeah.
See reviews. Yeah, all that compelling stuff.
Hmm.
Cool. So you transferred it back to this agency, and then how did your role evolve when that happened? Were you still, yeah? What were your main things you were doing once you transferred it back to the agency?
Yeah, so at that point, we had started to grow more. So I was really shifting into more of a management role. And most of what I was doing at that point was overseeing. And then also my like other third title at Free Fly was sort of project management, because there wasn't anyone in that role. And that comes naturally to me. And I had just kind of been doing that. So I just kept working on systems and processes for us as we grew. That was a big part. And then supporting. So at that point, there was people underneath me on both the e-commerce and the customer service side. So I was really just supporting and helping them build out whatever they were working on either side there.
Cool. What were some things that you like, books, resources, or things that were really helpful for you while you were on this, I mean, really fast journey? I know Free Fly grew really, really fast over the whole time you were there. Anything you remember, look back on being like, oh, that was helpful?
Ooh, specifically, I mean, I listened to the e-commerce influence podcast a lot, and
There we
like
go.
a lot. Yeah, there's a plug. Yeah, I mean, I listened to a lot of podcasts, and I think, I mean, to be honest, probably what was most helpful to me was getting into rooms with other people, other marketers, and people who were doing e-commerce, and talking to them. And that, like, we would do different groups, and we're part of a mastermind at one point. That kind of came about in a few different ways, but that was always like, after leaving those types of sessions, you have so many ideas and like things to get after. Plus you also have people that then you can reach back out to. So yeah, I mean, just talking to real people and being able to bounce ideas off of was always the most beneficial thing that I would do in that time. And people that were smarter than me, people that might have had marketing degrees or who had been doing it a lot longer than me. Just so much value in that.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree. I think that's a lot of the catalyst for the accelerator, the brand growth accelerator is like getting people in the right room with other people who are on the same page or a little bit above or right where you're at. And you just find that like so many things unlock when you can talk to somebody else who's been doing something for 2 years that you want to do, right? Like
Yep.
it's like, oh, all right, I'm going to take all the shortcuts here and get to a good starting point.
Yeah.
Lily, this has been awesome. I really appreciate you hopping on here and sharing. Anything else you think would be helpful to share? Things that you took away from your time there, from your learnings that you would like, you wish you could, that somebody had shared with you when you had just first started out at FreeFly.
I mean, I think just keeping it simple always. I think there were so many times where I would come up with this elaborate campaign plan that had all these different components and things, and they were fun, but a lot of work and a lot of time. And often we would find just like the really simple things that can still be really fun and really creative, but just not everything has to be a 7-channel like multi-touch point campaign,
Yeah.
especially in the early days when you're small. Like you can just run that email calendar and just get after the stuff that feels reachable. While you can, because there's a lot of low-hanging fruit that you can get after. And if you get too excited by the shiny objects that are over here, then you miss out on big opportunities that would have been really easy to implement early on.
Do you have any tips for promotions or sales, or did you guys even do that?
We did a little bit. We would align with different holidays, but we didn't have a huge discount strategy. Just it varies so much to your brand and who you're
Yeah.
selling to.
And like your market, whether your market, like in
Yeah.
beauty, it feels like so many people offer discounts. It's like part of the culture of the market.
Yeah, and I do think that there is an opportunity if you are starting out, like so easy to just run a discount and then your sales go up, but like if you do try to get a little bit more creative and think about like bundling is a huge opportunity, I think that isn't really a discount, and other ways to highlight product, whether that's limited release or something like that to drive sales over doing a discount, because if you offer a lot of discounts in the beginning, you're going to train your customers that they're always going to want discounts. So just
Yeah.
something to consider early on if you want to be a discount brand or not. And obviously, if you don't have to be a discount brand, it's much better to really just lean into your product if you're selling something that you believe in and tell that story and tell your brand story. I think that resonates. I know me personally as a buyer, like I would rather buy something that I feel aligned with their mission and what they're doing and the people behind it versus like getting 10% off. So I think overall in the marketplace, that's going to become more important too. So
Cool. Lily, thanks. It's been awesome.
yeah, it's been fun.
Thanks for hopping on.
Thank you.
All right. We'll talk later.
Sounds good. See ya.